We are 6 weeks into the college football season, and people are starting to change their mind about the Colorado Buffaloes.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We are also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcast. So thank you guys for tuning in, making me your first listen of the day. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Joining me today, as he does every week, is Scott Procter. Scott, are you ready for some Colorado football? There was only 1 week off, but it felt like it was a month.
Felt like, yeah, bro, I agree, bro. I felt like much longer, man. I felt like the longest week of this season so far. So, yeah, needless to say, man, I'm ready to see the Bucks back in action this weekend. Back at home, back at Folsom Field in Boulder for a matchup of, against a top 20 team in college football. Conference opponent, team that's playing really good football right now. Both teams playing really good football right now. Both teams coming up with a bye. Should be a fun week and a fun game on Saturday.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot to be excited about for Colorado, especially since the rest of the Big 12 is kind of floundering. And so let's talk about the narrative change around the Buffs. Today, I saw a video of Danny Cannell talking about how he could see Colorado sort of being a Big 12 contender, right? He said 8-4 is kind of his ceiling for the Buffs. Paul Feinbaum last week kind of went on a rant about Colorado, or not a rant, like a good rant. Usually don't get the Paul Feinbaum. He went on a rant about how they impressed him the most out of any team last week when they beat UCF. And so he also said they're a player for the Big 12, which in effect makes them a player for the college football playoff. Because obviously, if you contend for your conference title, you make the playoff. If you win, of course. So, Scott, let's talk about this change in narrative. Is it people realizing how good Colorado is? B, the rest of the Big 12 not being as good as we initially thought? Or is it C, my personal choice and favorite, both? All the above.
Yeah, bro, it's the classic combination of both, right? I mean, we can start with the fact that, most people, particularly in media spaces in college football, were not too high on Colorado heading into this season, based mostly on what we saw them do on the football field, in 2023, which in the era of the transfer portal and this new kind of guard of college football, what you are 1 year shouldn't necessarily really at all determine how you're going to play and perform the next season. And we're seeing the classic case of that with this Colorado football team. There's so many new players, there's so many new coaches. This is a completely different team than the one we saw last year in Deion Sanders' first year in Colorado. And that was a surprise to many people. I mean, it's kind of funny to me to hear Feinbaum kind of walking back some of his takes, because especially after that Nebraska loss, I mean, he was one of the main guys saying that this season was over. Deion leave. This program isn't a serious one, et cetera, et cetera. And again, Cannell, saying that, he thinks this team can be 8-4. It's funny to me as well. I mean, I think I mentioned last week on the show, I predicted this team to go 9-3 preseason. That's looking okay so far. There's obviously plenty of work to do. But
still in play?
The biggest thing is that, it's still in play, which is right, still in play. Which is in a lot of reasons the biggest reason that I predicted that record for this team this year is because, one, they have one of the best quarterbacks in college football. And through 6 weeks, I mean, I don't know if it's a quarterback playing better football than Shedeur Sanders. You have one of the best overall players, if not the best overall player in college football, in Travis Hunter. And sure, you could have said that about this team last year, right? And it could have been true, but it's about what they've done around them, building this team out, particularly with the trenches. This defense is playing lights out, one of the best second half defenses in all of college football. And then when you talk about the Big 12 piece of things, that obviously plays a role too, right? Because the teams that, again, going back to the many pundits who talked about this conference before the season, those teams at the top who are projected to be at the top aren't doing so hot. Right, Oklahoma State
they look terrible,
seemingly fallen off an entire cliff.
Scott,
right?
Do you have any eligibility left? And can you throw the ball 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage? Can you do it? Because you might be QB1 in Stillwater.
And again, with that game, that regular season finale being played in Boulder, I wonder how many people are going to, at this point, pick an Oklahoma State to beat this version of this Colorado football team, right? You look at even a team like Utah, whose quarterback, Cam Rising, we literally haven't seen in weeks. And, without him, I don't think anybody really takes that team seriously, as a Big 12 championship contender, or even obviously a playoff contender as well. And obviously Kansas State would be kind of the third team where they obviously slipped up a few weeks ago in a bad loss to BYU. But aside from that, they've looked like the team that I expect them to be preseason, the top 3 or 4 team in the conference, which makes this weekend so interesting and so riveting and so huge for this Colorado football program, because the win over that top 20 Kansas State team at home, 5-1 after your first bye. I mean, that's going to put them into the top 25 rankings of the AP poll, and that's going to have them as, if not the favorite to win the Big 12 after Saturday with the win, certainly one of the top 2 or 3 favorites to win the Big 12. And to your point, if you're in that conversation, then you're in the college football playoff conversation, which is a conversation that nobody was really willing to have before this season started. So again, it's a testament to Deion Sanders, right? The head coach of this program, who's built this thing over the last 2 years through the transfer portal, and obviously through the high school ranks as well, but really just getting talent in Boulder, getting the right talent, getting the right coaching, because again, we can talk about defensive coordinator Robert Livingston, which I think has been Deion Sanders' best decision that he's made since he's took over this program. I mean, he looks like a future head coaching star, whether it be in college football or even in the NFL, where he obviously from after working with the Cincinnati Bengals for the last 7 or 8 years. So again, 4-1 after your bye week with the huge game at home. The Buffs are sitting pretty right now.
Yeah, I like your Robert Livingston props. I'll give you a little teaser on what the most recent episode of Locked On Buffs was about, Scott. Here's the title. Did Deion Sanders make the hire of the year, a.k.a. Robert Livingston? Because not to go on a quick little tangent here, but I don't think Charles Kelly was the wrong hire by any means last year. I think he brought a lot of valuable experience. I think he brought a lot to the table. I think there was a combination.
Let me correct you. It was the wrong hire. It wasn't a bad hire.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bad hire, but it was the wrong hire for this team, for this group, for
I could agree with
this program where it's at, in my opinion. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, because on my show, I talked about Charles Kelly's hiring as someone who came in with a mindset of like, we're going to do something that's worked for me and what I've been around. And he's been around Alabama, which if you guys aren't familiar with, they're pretty good. Even despite the loss to Vanderbilt, obviously this past weekend, Vanderbilt they're known to get a few 5 stars here and there. And so going to a program like Colorado, where all of your players are guys who either A, played at a lower level, like Group of 5 or FCS level, or B, hadn't really had a starting role in any capacity, that's a lot to ask of them. So I think what I liked about Robert Livingston was he came in, said, hey, what are our strengths? That's what we're playing to. So I don't think Charles Kelly, I don't say he wasn't willing to do that, but I don't think he was as open to that as Robert Livingston was, which obviously shows sort of a newer mindset in Robert Livingston, because he is a younger coach in college football. So that was my sort of take on that. And I think Charles Kelly probably would have worked out in a different life, right? Just not for this one, which I think it worked out for everyone involved, right? And so, yeah, to talk about the Big 12, which as we all expected, the top 4 is, of course, Texas Tech, BYU, Iowa State, and then Colorado are the top 4 teams in the Big 12, which we all drew up in the preseason rankings, of course. But I look at the Big 12 conference, and like you mentioned, there's teams that were supposed to be really good that are not good at all, right? Kansas is currently in last place. Jalen Daniels looks like a shell of his former self. Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon hasn't done anything this year, right? Ollie Gordon went from like Heisman contender to he has 384 rushing yards on 3.8 yards per carry, which that's not great. They've played 6 games, and he's not even averaging 100 yards a game. And then you got your boy over at Boise State, Genty, who's averaging 10 yards per carry, almost 11, I think it is, and he has over 1,000 through 5 or 6 games. And then another team that a lot of people were kind of high on was that UCF team that Colorado blew out to smithereens, right? And so the Big 12 is just not who we thought it was. I think it's still competitive. I still think each week every team can beat someone else, like whoever it is. Kansas can probably beat Texas Tech next week if they were playing, right? Like that's just how deep this conference is. But I do think the improvement of the defense, the willingness to run the ball, and the more looks that we're seeing from the Colorado offense mixed with all of the talent that they added, this Colorado team's a lot better than people realize. And I think it's okay to admit that. I think a lot of people, when it comes to Colorado, it's like they suck. And I'm never going to admit that they don't suck. And it's like they're clearly good now. And everyone's like, well, the Big 12 is just not that good. And part of the Big 12 thing, it could be true, right? We don't know for sure. But you also have to give props where props are due. And Colorado is a way better football team than what we saw last year.
100%. And obviously, I mean, I have to give some credit to, I forgot who said it from PFF. It was just a short video that I saw recently. They were talking about Colorado. And, something that man mentioned was that when he thinks about the Big Ten, right, there's two things that stand out to him in terms of looking for teams that actually might have a chance to win it. Mm-hmm. Do you have a good quarterback? Can you stop the run? Colorado, through 5 games, clearly checks both of those boxes, right? Like I mentioned earlier, they have arguably the best quarterback in college football. And defensively, this team, evidenced by their, last outing, slowing down UCF's #1 ranked rushing attack in all of college football, holding them to a season-low rushing yards total. This defense can stop the run from what we see. Now, they'll get another big test this weekend, right? Because in my opinion, DJ Giddens is the best running back in the conference. I voted him, in my preseason ballot to be an all Big 12, running back alongside Ollie Gordon when other guys had, RJ Harvey, or even the Kansas running back. I think DJ Giddens is a real weapon. I mean, a real future NFL player. And Kansas State head coach said this morning, Monday morning, that, their identity right now is number 31 through DJ Giddens. And, off of that, that's where kind of stuff opens up. But, at the core of their offense is running it through DJ Giddens. So obviously, like I said, this defense is going to get another massive test in the run game this weekend. And if, they allow DJ Giddens to do what he's been doing, through the first part of the season, it's going to be tough for them to win. But if this Colorado defense continues to play like it has through 5 games, they're going to be 5-1, and they're going to be a top 25 team next week.
Yeah, they got 3 votes in the latest AP poll. I think if they get a win over a top 25 team, I think they jump up to probably 24-ish, 23 maybe.
Yeah.
Obviously, depends on what happens around the country because there's a lot of craziness going on. So that's TBD as well. But we are going to dive more into this Kansas State game when we come back. This episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. It helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. It's constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write a job description, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. Appreciate you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen of the day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We are 78 subscribers away from 6,000. Let's get there. I appreciate all you guys for tuning in every single day. Let's also get some questions or comments that you want me to discuss on Fridays. We're going to be doing a mailbag Friday, Scott, and whatever people want to say, whatever they want to talk about, I will talk about it. And we'll go all over the place with it. It's going to be interesting to say the least. But first, before we get to Friday, let's get to this Kansas State game. It's a really interesting matchup, right? We just talked about how good Colorado is at stopping the run. And what does Kansas State like to do? They like to run the ball, right? They have probably the most mobile quarterback in the Big 12, I would say, in Avery Johnson. I think he's probably at least the most athletic, track speed type of guy. I think he's the fastest player on their team, or at least one of the fastest players on their team. He's probably faster than most teams' receivers and running.
Dylan Edwards probably has something to say about that.
He's up there, though.
He's up there, for sure. No, I agree.
And I think the locks make them look faster, right? When you have flowing hair, it adds like a little speed boost to you. So this Colorado team, this Kansas State team, they match up, in my opinion, very similarly to UCF and Colorado. And so what do you see this matchup sort of shaping out to be, right? Like, what do you see from this Kansas State team?
Yeah, I mean, these are two teams who kind of know who they are at this point in the season, right? I mean, like I just mentioned there in the first before the first break there that, Kansas State head coach Chris Kleiman said, Monday morning that their identity right now is number 31, running their offense through DJ Giddens. So that's what you can expect, right? And obviously you mentioned Avery Johnson, who I'm very fond of. I was very high on him coming into this season, coming in his first season as a full starter at the college level. And obviously he's had ups and downs. He's going to have ups and downs because he's still such a young, raw player in terms of his development. But the talent is just so obvious, right? As a dual threat quarterback, like he has all the tools that you want in a modern day college football quarterback. Yes, he still has room to grow as a thrower, as a passer of the football, but he's as dynamic as anybody in college football from the quarterback position, as a runner making plays outside the pocket. So that's going to be huge for Colorado's defense, not allowing Avery Johnson to extend plays with his legs or make plays with his legs, keeping him in the pocket as much as they can and forcing him to be a pocket passer is going to be key for Robert Livingston, in this defense. And, obviously offensively, right, you have to stay balanced as best as you can, but this is a game where Shedeur Sanders, should continue to, be as dominant as he's been through 5 games so far this season, right?
I think
Colorado's receivers are elite. I don't think Kansas State's defensive backs are nearly on that level. I know they have one really solid DB whose name escapes my memory right now. Hopefully I can track that down before we end this episode. But, they're not a deep room. So, again, Travis, Will Shepard, Jimmy Horn Jr., who Chris Kleiman said today, he thinks is a phenomenal football player. Will Shepard as well. Rashante, those guys, along with obviously Shedeur calling the shots, should be able to do pretty much what they want to, this weekend. And obviously, again, you're going to have to stay balanced. You're going to have to, sprinkle in some run with Michael Welch, Dallas Hayden, Isaiah Augusta, who's come on here recently. But defensively, it's about keeping Avery Johnson, that running game, Dylan Edwards, DJ Giddens in check, and offensively, just Shedeur and that passing offense just continuing to operate business as usual.
Yeah, I think it's similar to the UCF game in the sense of you want to make this a game where Kansas State has to rely on their passing attack a lot, where it's like their run game is still going to be a factor. UCF still ran for 175 yards, which is 200 less than their normal average, but they still got they still did a little damage, not a lot, but they're still going to run the ball. Like they're not going to change how they operate. But when it comes to how they have to beat you, really, they're going to have to beat you through the air. And that means you're going to have to beat Travis Hunter. That means you're going to have to beat Preston Hodge, who I think is probably one of the most underrated additions for Colorado this season, outside of Nakai Hill-Green, who I feel like me and you talk about frequently. Preston Hodge made 2 monster plays in the game against UCF. I think the interception on the very first drive may have saved Colorado, which seems extreme, but a pick right away from Shedeur and then a touchdown probably would have been detrimental to this Colorado team, because we saw what happened when they played Nebraska, and that same thing happened. And so he also recovered a fumble. So he is all over the defense, and you're going to make Avery Johnson, who's not the most effective through the air yet, beat you. And I do think the one thing that's interesting to me, at least, is Kansas State currently ranks as the best offense that Colorado's played against. They are ranked 43rd in the country in total offense. So this will be definitely a heightened test for Colorado's defense, but I do think that I like the mindset that I'm seeing in these well-off media videos, right? I think it was Shane Cokes in the video that I saw most recently where he's like, guys, we have to focus on this Kansas State team. Like, I think there's a lot of emphasis on, and this is probably because of last year, which it should be, lessons learned, right? Where it's like, yeah, we won some games. It doesn't matter now, right? We're playing Kansas State. What happened at UCF 2 weeks ago no longer matters. It was a great win. It showed us what we could do, but it's not who we are until we prove that's who we are, right?
No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, man. And again, I think that's something that is going to help this team, right? Especially with some of those veteran leaders like Shedeur, like Travis, like Shane Cokes, who you mentioned, guys who were here last year that tasted a little bit of success, in that 3-1 start to the season. And obviously they experienced firsthand how all downhill quickly that all went. And I think they have some really good leaders in that building, that aren't going to let at least, that letdown happen again in terms of, like I said, completely falling off the cliff down the second half of the season, because success can get to your head, especially when you have a bye week after a huge win, where for a week plus, all you're hearing about is how good you are and how good you've been playing, right? That could have a negative effect on, your performance the next week. And I think it's interesting, obviously, too, that both of these teams are coming off a bye. both of these teams previous week before their bye had a big win over, a conference opponent. So it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be, very fascinating to see just how these two teams kind of respond to early season success and how they respond to, the first, bye week of the season. Obviously, I think it helps a little bit that Colorado is the home team this weekend, and they can kind of, stick to their typical routine and schedule throughout the week and whatnot. But, once things are kicked off on Saturday, it's about which team is, better prepared, and which team has a better plan to come out with a victory.
Yeah, it also comes down to, as the old people say, which team was not reading the press clippings about them, right? Like which team was not getting a little high on themselves, gassing themselves up a little bit after big wins, like you mentioned. So each team, right? Kansas State has a chance to really solidify themselves as the top team in the Big 12, and Colorado has a chance to sort of solidify themselves as a legitimate Big 12 title contender with the win. So a lot on the line for both teams. Me and Scott are going to give you our predictions when we come back. This episode of Locked On Buffs is also brought to you by our sponsors over at Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live event even easier. Gametime Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They also have your view before you buy your seat, so you can see exactly what your view is going to be during the game. They have their lowest price guarantee, or their Gametime will give you 110% of the difference, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. Appreciate you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen of the day. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Thank you guys for subscribing. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let's dive right into our predictions, Scott. I'll give you my pregame, everything you need to know, as I do every week. This one's looking a lot different. Even the odds makers are changing their narratives on Colorado, right? Colorado they've been underdogs in every game for the most part outside of Colorado State, but they've mostly been like touchdown or more underdogs. And now they're only 4-point underdogs, according to ESPN right now. ESPN's matchup predictor gives Kansas State a 52% chance of winning, which pretty much 50-50. Colorado's at 47.9. And then weather-wise, it's obviously a night game at 8:15 local time over there in Boulder. 70 degrees is what we're seeing on the weather report right now. Could be not too chilly. It's been colder in Boulder. I'm not trying to rhyme, I promise, but it has been. Both teams are coming off big wins, like Scott talked about. Kansas State beat Oklahoma State 42-20 after getting blown out by BYU, and then Colorado is coming off of two big wins against Baylor and then UCF. So, Scott, I will lead the way with my prediction. I think Colorado wins a close one here. Any team that their bread and butter is predicated off running the ball against this Colorado team, until someone shows that, hey, we could figure out how to run the ball against this Colorado team, I'm going to count on Colorado to stop the run, because they've given me no reason this year to not show that they can't stop the run, especially when you slow down the number one rushing offense in the country. That's called learning from things. I learned from my previous predictions. So I think Colorado wins this game 35-28. I do think that Kansas State is still going to get theirs. I think they have figured out a way to get Dylan Edwards and other receivers / running backs involved in the passing game. And I do think that's going to be a closer one, but I do think Colorado wins this game. What do you think?
Yeah, man. I'm still a bit unsure at this point in the season, or at this point in the week, excuse me. Like I said, before the season, I predicted Colorado to go 9-3. One of those three losses that I predicted were to this Kansas State team here this weekend. And I think at this point, I'm going to stick with that prediction of Colorado losing a very close game. If I had to put a score prediction on it, I'd say Kansas State wins 37-35 with the Wildcats in the late field goal to win it, obviously. Biggest reasons for that, again. Yeah,
what's the difference for you? Like, what makes Colorado lose this game, you think?
Yeah, and again, for full disclosure, I picked Colorado to win every game this season up to this point.
Right.
So my record, like theirs, is 4-1. And the biggest thing to me is just Kansas State. It's Kansas State. This has to do more with Kansas State than Colorado State. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, I'm very high on Avery Johnson. I think he is the best quarterback that this Colorado team has played up to this point in the season, right? You can throw in Dylan Raiola, who's a true freshman, but Obviously, Avery's just a little bit more experienced, and I think at this point, a little bit more talented, more polished, both as a runner and a passer. So Avery Johnson, again, I'm just very high on him, and I think he's a really dynamic player who can really put defenses into binds, again, with his legs and, making plays with his arm. And then also, too, DJ Giddens. I think he's the best running back this Colorado team has faced up to this point in the season. He's a physical runner who is really hard to tackle. And when you pair him along with Dylan Edwards, who comes in as a change of pace guy, someone who can catch a ball out of the backfield, be dynamic in space, I think that's a three-headed monster, if you will, if you put Avery in that run game, in that backfield in Kansas State, that could really give Colorado's much improved defense some issues. And again, for those reasons, Chris Kleiman to me is also one of the best coaches in all of college football, not even just the Big 12. I think he's going to have his team prepared. And I think if Kansas State was entering this game undefeated, I think I'd be a bit more inclined to pick Colorado. But because Kansas State has kind of already been humbled on the road, had that wake-up call early to BYU, I think there's a very small chance of them coming into this game unprepared, not ready to play. So again, for those reasons, I think Kansas State wins a really close game. And again, this doesn't end anything for Colorado. They still have everything still in front of them, even with the loss. A bunch of winnable games, a bunch of games that could still propel them into the Big 12 championship conversation. But again, to me at this point too, and I want to mention this as well, just going on against Kansas State, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at their schedule the rest of the way, right? Obviously, they play Colorado this week. Then they have West Virginia, who's been disappointing. Kansas, who is quite literally in last place. Houston, Arizona State, Cincinnati, and they close on the road at Iowa State. If Kansas State wins this weekend, I think there's a chance they win every game the rest of the way throughout the regular season. Then they end the regular season with one loss, that one early season loss to BYU on the road, which again looks like BYU is a good team. And that's honestly how I kind of envision Kansas State's rest of the season looking. Again, assuming they do what I think they're going to do on Saturday against Colorado. I think this is a one-loss team who is kind of going to lock up their place in the Big 12 championship game. And if it could be a rematch with Colorado in said Big 12 championship game, which in that case, I would probably be picking Colorado for the revenge factor. But as far as this weekend, I think Kansas State wins a close game. It wouldn't surprise me at all, wouldn't shock me at all if Colorado continued their hot streak and continue to win and go on to 5-1. But at this point, I think Kansas State gets a really close win. It should be a really fun game nonetheless.
Yeah, you're just picking them for the plot, right? You just want that revenge game factor, right?
Yeah, it's all about the narrative.
Of course, it's all about the narrative. Interesting fact, though, before we depart, Kansas State is the only game left on Colorado's schedule that ESPN doesn't have Colorado projected to win, according to their matchup
that sounds about right.
Predictor. Arizona, Colorado has a 55% chance. Cincinnati, it goes up to 66. Texas Tech, 52, which obviously that's pretty close. Even Utah right now, ESPN hates Utah, according to the matchup predictor. They give Colorado a 60% chance of beating them, which if Isaac Wilson's at quarterback, I could totally see that happening.
Right.
Kansas, against Kansas, they have a 51% chance of winning. And then Oklahoma State to close out the season, 63.9. So even if Colorado loses this game, like Scott said, it doesn't deter them from reaching their goal. They could still make the Big 12 championship. They could still make the college football playoff, right? This is sort of the beauty of the expanded playoff is your season is not over until you are no longer in contention in your conference, right? That's when your playoff hopes are dead, right? And so at that point, which there's still a lot of football left to be played, but Colorado still has a lot of opportunities to play for and claim a Big 12 title spot. So this game, while it is a good sort of chance to make a statement and jump into the rankings for Colorado, it's not the end-all be-all. And so I think that's what Colorado fans need to realize, and the team itself, right? If it goes their way, great. If it doesn't, guess what? We still control our own destiny. So for Colorado, it'll be a really interesting matchup. I appreciate you for hopping on, Scott, and talking to all things Buffs football with me. Tell the people where they could find you and what articles you got cooking up this week.
Yeah, as always, go shoot my Twitter, now known as X, a follow right here at the channel down below, and also go check out all my work, my recent content on the ColoradoWin.com. We got some good stuff cooking, per usual, right? checking in with the Coach Prime tomorrow for his presser. So check out the latest on that, my takeaways from that. And as always, we'll have you updated with the latest ahead of Saturday's showdown in Boulder versus K-State.
It's going to be a good one, and we're going to have you covered over here on Locked On Buffs every single day, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. I will see you guys tomorrow. Everyone, have a great start to your week.